My name is Melissa Carter, and I am 29 years old. I wish I could tell you that my life was ordinary, that I grew up in a safe family with laughter and love. But I cannot. The truth is that the defining moment of my life came in the most brutal way possible on the day I lost the ability to move my legs. I can still hear the echo of the laughter that followed me as I lay broken on the ground. I can still hear my brother Ethan shouting at me to stop pretending. I can still see my father Richard scowling and ordering me to walk it off. And I can still remember my mother Linda whispering that I was ruining the party. That was the day my world shattered, not only because of the physical pain that tore through my body, but because I realized once and for all that the people who were supposed to protect me were the ones most eager to dismiss my suffering. It was supposed to be a celebration, a night of champagne toasts and smiling photographs. Ethan had just gotten engaged, and my parents spared no expense for the party. There were white tents on the lawn, strings of lights wrapped around trees, waiters carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. From the outside, the Carter family looked flawless. A respected lawyer father, a well-groomed mother, a successful son with a beautiful fiancée, and me, the forgotten daughter brought in for decoration, expected to play the role of supportive sibling. Nobody knew that beneath the polished surface, years of cruelty and neglect had hardened into something toxic. I arrived at that party already bracing myself for the comments, the comparisons, the subtle humiliations that always came when we gathered. I had rehearsed the polite smile, the small talk, the way I would keep my distance. But nothing could have prepared me for the trap that Ethan set for me that night. When I stepped onto the new wooden deck that my father was so proud of, I knew instantly something was wrong. The surface felt slick, unnaturally so. Before I could steady myself, my foot slid forward and my body was thrown back violently. I remember the sound of my head striking the edge of the concrete step. I remember the lightning bolt of pain that shot up my spine, and then the terrifying void of sensation that followed. I tried to move my legs, but they were gone from me, erased in an instant. "Help!" I gasped, my voice cracking. "I cannot feel my legs!" The first face I saw above me was Ethan's. He was smirking, his arms crossed like he was watching a scene in a play. "Come on, Melissa," he said, loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "Stop being dramatic. You are always trying to steal attention." The guests chuckled nervously, unsure if this was another sibling squabble or something more serious. "Dad?" I cried, hoping for rescue. My father only shook his head. "Get up, Melissa. You are embarrassing this family. Nothing is wrong with that deck. Walk it off." And my mother, always eager to maintain appearances, crouched beside me and hissed, "You always exaggerate. You are not going to make a scene at your brother's engagement party." In that moment, flat on the ground with my body refusing to respond, I realized that my pain was invisible to them. My pleas were inconvenient, my injury a disruption. They did not see me as a daughter in crisis, but as a liability to be silenced. What none of them knew was that this time their denial would not just be cruel, it would be criminal. Because the truth of what Ethan had done and their refusal to act would soon unravel in a way that no polished image could protect them from. From the outside, the Carter family home in New Jersey was the kind of place people envied. A 2-story colonial house with white shutters and a manicured lawn, a father who was a respected lawyer in town, a mother who organized church events and charity galas, a son celebrated as the pride of the family, and a daughter who was always described in vague, polite terms. But behind those walls, the truth was suffocating. My father Richard was a man who measured worth by appearances and control. At 6 feet tall, with a commanding voice, he believed emotions were weakness and obedience was strength. He used his position in the community as a shield, and inside our home, he ruled with an iron hand. When he spoke, it was final, and questioning him was seen as betrayal. My mother, Linda, lived in his shadow, fragile in her own way, but loyal to him above everything else. She cultivated the image of the perfect wife who smiled at the right moments, who decorated for holidays, who attended book clubs, but behind closed doors, she flinched at any conflict that might expose the family's fractures. She had mastered the art of denial, brushing off Richard's harshness with phrases like, "That is just how he is," or "He only wants what is best for us." Then there was Ethan, my older brother by 3 years, who learned early that charm and manipulation could get him anything. Teachers adored him, coaches praised him, friends wanted to be near him, and my parents worshipped him. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. If he got into trouble, it was explained away as boys being boys. If he hurt me, it was dismissed as sibling rivalry. I, on the other hand, was the scapegoat. My achievements were minimized, my emotions mocked, and my needs ignored. Whenever I cried or protested, my father accused me of being weak, and my mother urged me to stay quiet for the sake of peace. The pattern was clear. Ethan was rewarded for aggression while I was punished for vulnerability. This dynamic played out over and over until it seeped into my bones. Our family dinners were rehearsed performances. Richard would talk about his cases, Linda would nod along, Ethan would brag about his latest victories, and I would sit in silence, careful not to disturb the delicate balance. If I mentioned my own accomplishments, they would be dismissed or compared unfavorably to Ethan's. If I voiced unhappiness, I was accused of being ungrateful. The unwritten rule was simple. Ethan shined, I endured, and together we maintained the illusion of perfection for the neighbors. But behind that illusion was a steady current of emotional violence. Every sarcastic remark chipped away at me. Every time my mother turned her face instead of defending me, it reinforced the message that I was expendable. Ethan basked in the glow of their adoration, becoming bolder, meaner, more reckless, while I retreated into myself, internalizing the idea that no one would ever take my side. Growing up in this environment was like living in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. I was constantly improvising, trying to survive without provoking the inevitable criticism. Even small choices like what I wore or how I spoke could trigger a lecture. My father believed discipline built character, so he nitpicked every aspect of my life. My mother believed harmony mattered most, so she silenced me whenever I disrupted it. Ethan believed the world was his stage, so he used me as the prop in his endless performance. People often say that family is supposed to be your safe place, the place where you are accepted unconditionally. For me, it was the opposite. Home was the battlefield where my self-worth was under constant attack. And the cruelest part was that to the outside world, we were untouchable. Everyone admired the Carters. Everyone envied our life. Nobody saw the cracks because my parents were masters at polishing the facade. They were determined to present us as flawless no matter what happened behind closed doors. And I learned that any attempt to reveal the truth would be punished because exposing imperfection was the greatest sin in our household. My earliest memories are not of warmth, but of impact, bruises, tears, and the sound of laughter that was never with me, but always at me. When I was 7 years old, Ethan pushed me off the backyard swing so he could show his friends how high he could go. I landed hard on the gravel, my wrist snapping with a sickening crack. I remember screaming and clutching my arm, hoping my parents would rush to comfort me. Instead, Richard said, "Melissa, you need to be more careful. Children fall all the time." Linda hovered, fretting about the hospital bill more than my pain. Ethan smirked and claimed I had slipped on my own. They believed him, instantly praising his honesty while I sat in the emergency room with tears streaming down my face and the first cast of my life. At 12, Ethan locked me in the dark tool shed during a thunderstorm, knowing I was terrified of lightning. Hours passed while I screamed and pounded on the door. By the time I was finally let out, my throat raw and my body trembling, Ethan laughed and told our parents I had hidden myself for attention. My father said, "Melissa, stop making up stories," and Linda whispered that I should not upset my brother with silly accusations. The message was clear. My fear was entertainment, not concern. At 16, I worked tirelessly on a science project building a model of the solar system that could rotate with a small motor. The night before it was due, Ethan sneaked into my room and dismantled it, scattering pieces across the floor. I cried when I discovered the destruction, but when I told Richard, he shook his head and said, "Melissa, if you had not procrastinated, you would have had time to rebuild." Linda reminded me to stop blaming Ethan for my failures. I went to school with nothing, my grade plummeted, and Ethan strutted around as though his sabotage was an accomplishment. By then, I had already learned that my voice carried no weight in the Carter household. Each time I tried to speak up, I was labeled dramatic, ungrateful, or weak. Each time I showed pain, they rolled their eyes. The wounds were not always visible, but they cut deeper than broken bones. Ethan stole my birthday money, read my diary aloud to his friends, and once spread a rumor that I was failing classes just to watch me squirm when teachers confronted me. I excelled academically despite it all, clinging to school as the only space where effort mattered. But even there, my achievements were stolen from me at home. If I won an award, Richard compared it to Ethan's athletic trophies. If I received praise from a teacher, Linda insisted Ethan had always been the real talent. By the time I reached high school graduation, I was numb. The applause from the audience felt hollow because I knew my family's claps were obligatory, not genuine. Ethan mocked my speech behind my back, while Richard congratulated him for behaving like a supportive brother. I spent my teenage years drifting between invisible and scapegoated, never secure, never safe. Friends who came over noticed the tension but could never name it. They saw a father with stern charm, a mother serving snacks, a brother joking around. They did not see the subtle cruelty threaded through every interaction the way my parents' eyes lit up for Ethan and dulled for me. I started writing in journals, pouring out secrets no one wanted to hear. Sometimes I fantasized about running away. Other times I convinced myself I was overreacting, repeating the family mantra that I was too sensitive. This cycle of denial and pain became my normal. By the time I turned 18, I was desperate to escape. I had endured 11 years of being dismissed, ridiculed, and blamed. The physical incidents were obvious, but it was the psychological scars that haunted me. Standing in that house every day meant standing in a place where my reality was constantly rewritten. If Ethan hurt me, it was my fault. If I cried, I was manipulative. If I succeeded, it was diminished. Every memory carried the same theme. Ethan's cruelty flourished because my parents nurtured it. My suffering multiplied because they chose not to see it. Childhood is supposed to be the time you build trust in the world. For me, it was the time I learned to distrust my own perception. It is a heavy legacy, one that followed me into adulthood and shaped every decision I made. And though I thought leaving for college would sever those chains, the truth was that the patterns of neglect and betrayal were carved too deep to vanish with distance. Leaving home at 18 felt like escaping a prison. I packed my bags for nursing school in Philadelphia and told myself that this was the start of a new life, a life where my voice might finally matter. For the first time, I lived in a dorm surrounded by people who did not know me as Richard's disappointing daughter or Ethan's weaker sibling. They saw me as Melissa, a young woman studying hard, eager to help others, and passionate about medicine. I excelled in my classes and discovered that compassion, the very trait mocked at home, was celebrated in the hospital wards. Patients smiled when I sat with them, professors praised my diligence, and friends valued my kindness. For a while, I almost believed the past could not touch me anymore. Yet no matter how far I moved physically, the psychological leash tugged me back. My father called to lecture me about spending too much on books my mother guilted me into visiting on weekends, and Ethan sent mocking texts whenever he learned about my achievements. They insisted I come home for holidays, reminding me that family obligations outweighed personal desires. Even when I wanted to stay in the city with friends, I would hear Linda's voice saying, "Melissa, do not be selfish. Ethan wants you here." And against my better judgment, I went. Each visit reignited the old wounds. At Thanksgiving, Richard grilled me about my career choices, saying nursing was beneath the Carter name, while Ethan bragged about his sales job and mocked my scrubs. At Christmas, Linda commented on my weight or closed subtle digs that reminded me I could never meet her standards. I left each gathering exhausted, vowing never to return, but months later, guilt reeled me back in. Therapy became my refuge. In the office of Dr. Stein, I slowly unpacked the trauma. He explained terms like scapegoat and gaslighting concepts that described my childhood better than any memory could. He taught me breathing exercises for anxiety and encouraged me to set boundaries. Still, boundaries were easier in theory than practice. Richard's voice on the phone made me revert to a powerless child. Linda's tears made me feel responsible for her happiness. Ethan's laughter reignited rage I tried to bury. The cycle repeated. At work, I was respected. At home, I was diminished. I coped by limiting contact, choosing neutral words, staying only long enough to fulfill appearances. My friends noticed the way my mood sank after family visits. One said, "Melissa, you always look like you have been through a war when you come back from New Jersey." She was right. It was a battle each time one I never truly won. Still, part of me longed for recognition from them, a part that believed if I just achieved enough or behaved perfectly, they might finally value me. That hope, fragile and misguided, was the thread that tied me to them. And it was that thread Ethan tugged when he invited me to his engagement party, insisting that family should be together for such an important milestone. Against every instinct, I agreed, not knowing that the decision would cost me the life I once knew. Ethan's engagement party was designed to impress. When I pulled into the long driveway of my parents' house that evening, the front yard was already lit up with fairy lights strung across the trees, and valet attendants were parking luxury cars. A white tent stretched across the back lawn, and inside I could see waiters in crisp uniforms carrying trays of champagne. My father, Richard, thrived on events like this occasions, where he could parade his wealth and status. My mother, Linda, floated at his side in a sequined dress, her smile wide but hollow. They greeted guests like royalty, their arms draped around Ethan and his fiancée, Claire, the golden couple of the night. I forced myself to smile as I approached, handing my coat to an attendant, and stepping into the world I had tried so hard to escape. From the moment I arrived, the comparisons began. "Melissa, you look tired," my mother whispered while adjusting my hair without asking. Ethan grinned smugly and said, "You finally decided to show up, little sister." I laughed politely, but inside my stomach tightened. I had rehearsed for this, reminding myself to stay calm, to endure a few hours to slip away unnoticed. The crowd was full of Ethan's college friends, his coworkers, old neighbors who always believed the Carter family was perfect. They clapped him on the back, congratulated him on his success, admired the sparkling ring on Claire's finger. I hovered at the edges of conversation, sipping water, answering polite questions about nursing with short sentences, and bracing against the inevitable digs. When Ethan noticed me standing alone, he made sure to call attention to it. "Melissa always was the shy one," he announced loudly. "She hides in corners so people will feel sorry for her." Laughter erupted around him. I forced a smile, but my chest burned. Richard overheard and smirked proudly as though Ethan's cruelty was wit. I excused myself, pretending to look for the restroom, but really I just needed air. Out on the new deck, the night was cooler, the air carrying the scent of grilled steaks and flowers. Richard had bragged for weeks about the expensive hardwood he had imported for it. He had even mentioned it to me on the phone, saying, "This deck will last longer than you, Melissa." I walked slowly across the planks, my flats making soft sounds against the wood. Something felt odd underfoot, a subtle slickness that made me cautious. I thought maybe condensation had formed, but the sheen looked different, almost oily. Before I could react, Ethan appeared beside me. Drink in hand, his smile stretched wide. "Enjoying the party, sis?" he asked, voice dripping with mockery. I nodded and tried to step past him. He shifted to block my path. "You know Claire's friends think you are quiet because you are jealous. Maybe you should prove them right." Then he leaned closer and whispered, "You should take a dive." Before I could understand what he meant, my right foot slid forward violently. The surface beneath me was too slick, unnaturally so, and balance was gone. My body pitched backward and time slowed. I saw Ethan watching anticipation in his eyes. I saw guests through the glass doors laughing unaware. I saw the edge of the concrete step rushing toward me, then impact. A crack at the back of my skull, a burst of pain exploding down my spine, and suddenly, nothing. A terrifying void below my waist. I gasped for air, vision swimming the world tilting. "Help!" I croaked, but my voice barely carried. Ethan loomed above me, smirk curling at his lips. "Stop being dramatic, Melissa. Always the actress." I tried to move to push myself up, but my legs refused. Panic surged through me. "Dad!" I cried out as Richard stepped onto the deck. He glanced down at me, irritation etched on his face. "Melissa, you are embarrassing us." "Get up! The deck is safe. Walk it off." I shook my head, tears spilling. "I cannot feel my legs. Please." My mother appeared behind him. Her hands clasped her face tight with embarrassment, not concern. "Do not ruin this night," she whispered harshly. Ethan's friends crowded at the doorway, laughing uncertainly, waiting for a punchline. I lay on the deck, unable to move my head, throbbing my body, betraying me. The realization hit like ice. They would not help me, they never had. They never would. The trap Ethan set was not just on the wood. It was in the lifelong roles we had played. Him the golden boy, me the scapegoat, them the blind enablers. I begged again. Please, I need a hospital. Richard turned his back, returning to the grill. Linda forced a smile for the guests and murmured, Melissa always makes things bigger than they are. Ethan took a sip of his drink, his eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. In that moment, I understood that my body might be broken forever, but what would truly destroy them was not my fall. It would be the truth that followed the truth they could not bury under charm or denial, the truth that would turn their perfect facade into a criminal case. I lay flat on the deck, my breath shallow, my spine screaming in silent agony, my legs terrifyingly numb. Yet the only thing louder than my fear was the indifference etched into the faces of those who should have cared. Ethan crouched near me, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he said, Get up, Melissa, this is pathetic. You always wanted the spotlight. His words sliced through me sharper than the pain radiating from my back. I whispered again, I cannot move my legs. Something is wrong, but he only laughed, lifting his glass to the onlookers as though I were performing for them. My father Richard approached, then his steps heavy, his jaw clenched. I thought for one fragile second that he might kneel and help me. Instead, he scowled and barked. Walk it off, Melissa. You are humiliating this family. That debt cost me thousands. It is perfect. You are not hurt. You are dramatic. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others whispering, but no one intervened. My mother Linda knelt beside me, but not to comfort me. Her perfectly made-up face twisted with controlled fury as she hissed under her breath. You will not ruin Ethan's engagement. People are watching. Stop this nonsense now. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to lift my legs, but nothing moved. My arms trembled as I pushed against the deck, my body refusing to respond. Mom, please, I begged. I need an ambulance. She shook her head quickly, her earrings flashing under the lights. Her voice barely audible as she said, Do not make me choose between you and your brother. You will not win. The words knocked the air from me more than the fall had. I was not her daughter in that moment. I was an inconvenience, a disruption, a stain on her carefully crafted image. I sobbed openly now, pleading louder, but Richard turned his back and returned to the grill as though the sizzling meat mattered more than my cries. Ethan rolled his eyes and muttered, She is probably drunk, she cannot handle anything. The cruelty was casual, dismissive, a pattern so ingrained that no one questioned it. Around me, faces gathered, some curious, some uncomfortable, none willing to help. The humiliation was suffocating. My own family was erasing my reality in front of dozens of witnesses. I felt my stomach churn and nausea rise, the world spinning. I cried, I think I am going to be sick. Linda forced a smile at the guests and said, She does this sometimes she gets emotional. Just enjoy the party. Laughter and music floated from the tent, blending with my sobs, until the whole scene felt surreal, like a nightmare I could not wake from. Every second that passed deepened my despair. The pain spread across my back like fire, the numbness in my legs tightening like a trap. I knew something catastrophic had happened inside me, but the people who should have acted were doing nothing. Worse than nothing, they were dismissing me. That was the moment when the betrayal crystallized. My body was broken, but the shattering of trust was more complete. For 29 years, I had been told I was dramatic, weak, manipulative, a burden. And now, as I lay paralyzed on the deck, bleeding internally, those same words were being used to justify leaving me helpless. The night air grew colder, the lights above blurred, and for a moment I wondered if I might die there with no one willing to admit I was in danger. The last thing I heard before my vision darkened was Ethan's voice echoing in my ears. Stop pretending, Melissa, you always loved a stage. Just when I thought I would fade out on that deck, a new voice cut through the crowd, firm and commanding in a way that silenced even Ethan. Excuse me, I am a doctor. Let me through. The guests parted reluctantly, and a woman in her 30s with dark hair, pulled back into a neat bun, knelt beside me. Her badge clipped to her dress read, Hannah Lopez, M.D. She leaned close, her tone both calm and urgent, and asked, "Can you tell me your name?" "Melissa," I whispered through trembling lips. She touched my wrist, counting my pulse, then quickly scanned my body. "Melissa, I need you to stay completely still," she said clearly. "Can you feel me touching your legs?" I shook my head and tears spilled from my eyes. "No, I cannot." Her face tightened, but she stayed professional. "This is a spinal emergency. Someone call 911 now." My father, Richard, stepped forward, puffing his chest, his voice cold. "That will not be necessary. She is exaggerating as usual. She is perfectly fine." Dr. Lopez snapped her gaze up to him, her tone turning sharp. "Sir, your daughter may have a spinal cord injury. If you move her or delay treatment, she could be permanently paralyzed. We need paramedics immediately." Linda fluttered anxiously beside him, whispering to guests with a shaky smile. "Do not listen to her. Melissa always overreacts. She will be fine." Dr. Lopez ignored them, pulling her phone from her pocket and dialing emergency herself. Ethan shifted awkwardly a few feet away, his smirk faltering as the doctor examined the deck boards. She rubbed her fingers against the surface and narrowed her eyes. "This is not water," she said firmly. "This is some kind of lubricant. Did someone put this here?" The silence that followed was heavy. A few guests glanced at Ethan, who paled but said nothing. Dr. Lopez returned her focus to me, resting a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Melissa's stay with me help is on the way. Your breathing is shallow but steady. Do not try to move." My vision blurred again, and I whispered, "Please, do not let them leave me like this." She looked into my eyes and said with absolute certainty, "I will not." Her words pierced through the fog of betrayal like a lifeline. For the first time that night, someone believed me. Someone recognized my pain instead of dismissing it. Around us, the party atmosphere fractured. Music still played faintly from the tent, but guests whispered nervously, some slipping away to avoid involvement, others staring at Ethan, who shifted from foot to foot like a trapped animal. Richard tried one last time to assert control, growling, "Doctor, you are overstepping. This is my house and my family." Dr. Lopez held his stare without flinching. "No, sir. This is my patient, and I will not allow your negligence to cripple her further." The sound of distant sirens cut through the night, then growing louder, promising rescue. Relief flooded me, even as pain roared through my body. I clung to Dr. Lopez's steady gaze, her calm voice, the certainty that she would not abandon me. In that moment, I knew the facade my parents had spent decades building was crumbling, and no amount of denial could hold back the truth rushing toward them. The paramedics rushed me into the ambulance, strapping me carefully onto a backboard, their voices urgent as they relayed my vitals. I could hear Dr. Lopez insisting on riding with me, her authority unshakable, even when Richard tried to block her path. The doors closed on his furious face, and for the first time in my life, I felt the control of my parents slip away. The siren wailed, drowning out everything except the pounding of my heart. Inside the hospital, the fluorescent lights blurred above me as doctors and nurses swarmed. They asked questions I could barely answer, their voices blending into a chorus of urgency. My legs lay heavy, foreign, unresponsive. A nurse reassured me softly, saying, "We are taking you straight to imaging. Stay with us." Within minutes, I was slid into the cold chamber of the MRI machine, its clanging echo filling my ears. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears, praying for any answer that might explain the horror of what I felt. When the scan was complete, I was wheeled into a quiet room where Dr. Patel, the neurologist on call, entered with a grim face. He pulled up the images on the monitor and pointed to the shadowy outlines of my spine. There, along the thoracic region, a fracture glowed bright against the screen, pressing dangerously on my spinal cord. He turned to me and said calmly but firmly, "Melissa, you have a spinal fracture with cord compression. That is why you cannot move your legs. If we do not operate immediately, the paralysis could become permanent." His words sank into me like ice. I swallowed hard, my voice shaking as I asked, "Is there a chance I will walk again?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There is a chance if we relieve the pressure quickly, But there is also a risk that the damage is irreversible. The sooner we act, the better. Tears spilled down my cheeks as the reality crystallized. In one evening, my life had been split in two before the fall and after. Yet beneath the fear was a flicker of anger, the memory of Ethan's smirk, my father's dismissal, my mother's whispers. They had tried to erase my pain as if it were nothing, but here was undeniable proof glowing on a hospital screen. Dr. Patel placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "We are assembling the surgical team now. Do you have family we should call?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "They are the reason I am here." Dr. Lopez, who had stayed by my side the entire time, interjected gently. "She has been through enough tonight. Let me be her contact for now." I nodded gratefully, clinging to her presence like an anchor. Hours blurred as preparations swirled around me. Consent forms, 4 lines, anesthesiologists explaining risks. Each step felt surreal, as if I were floating outside my body. Finally, they wheeled me into the operating room, the bright lights glaring down the masked faces moving with precision. The anesthesiologist whispered count backwards from 10, and by 7, the world faded to black. When I woke, it was with a searing ache across my back and the sterile smell of recovery filling my nostrils. Machines beeped steadily beside me. My throat was raw from the breathing tube. A nurse leaned close and said softly, "The surgery is over. You are stable." Relief and dread tangled inside me. I tried to wiggle my toes, but nothing happened. Panic surged until Dr. Patel appeared, his voice calm. "Melissa, the surgery went as planned. We removed the bone fragments compressing your spinal cord. Now we wait to see what function may return. Swelling must go down first. It could take days or weeks to know." His words carried both hope and uncertainty. I nodded weakly, tears sliding silently across my cheeks. The door opened then, and to my shock, Richard and Linda walked in, their expressions carefully composed. Richard spoke first, his tone clipped. "The doctor tells us you had surgery. I hope you will recover quickly so we can put this misunderstanding behind us." Misunderstanding. The word hit me like another blow. My body broken, my future uncertain, and still he framed it as drama. Linda stepped forward, her voice falsely sweet. "We told everyone you just slipped. No need to make a scene about it." My chest tightened with rage, but before I could respond, Dr. Lopez, who had been waiting nearby, interjected sharply. "This is not a misunderstanding. The MRI clearly showed spinal damage. This was not a fainting spell or an accident that can be brushed aside. Melissa deserves the truth to be acknowledged." Richard glared, but she did not flinch. For once, someone in authority stood against them, and I felt a surge of gratitude. As the days passed, I remained in the hospital tethered to IVs and monitors. Physical therapists began gentle movements testing responses. Each day brought small victories in my arms, but my legs remained still heavy foreign. Frustration gnawed at me, yet I clung to determination. Visitors came. Friends from school, colleagues from the hospital where I trained. They brought flowers, cards, whispered encouragement. They believed me. They saw my pain and did not call it dramatic. And each time they came, I felt stronger, more certain that the narrative my family clung to was unraveling. The nurses documented every detail, noting the lubricant residue Dr. Lopez had described, noting the MRI images, noting my consistent account. Evidence piled quietly, inescapably. And in that sterile hospital room, I vowed that I would no longer be their scapegoat. They had tried to bury me under denial, but the truth was outcarved into my spine, etched into the images that no amount of charm or control could erase. The hospital became both my prison and my refuge. I hated the sterile walls, yet within them, I finally had witnesses who documented everything and refused to let my parents' narrative stand. The pivotal moment came 3 days after my surgery, when Dr. Patel returned with the full MRI report in hand. He placed the pages on the tray table and spoke with deliberate clarity. "Melissa, these scans prove beyond any doubt that your paralysis was caused by traumatic impact, not fainting, not exaggeration." He pointed to the sharp lines of the fracture, the swelling compressing the cord. "This is consistent with a fall caused by external conditions." Dr. Lopez, who had become a daily visitor, added firmly, "I told the paramedics about the oily substance on the deck. That deck was deliberately tampered with. She turned toward Richard and Linda, who had arrived earlier in another performance of parental concern. Her tone sharpened. Someone created a trap. Ethan's name hung unspoken in the air, but everyone felt it. Richard scoffed, waving his hand. Enough of this. My son would never sabotage his sister. Melissa has always sought attention. Linda chimed in with a quivering voice. She slipped. People slip all the time. Why must you invent cruelty? But their words sounded weaker now against the weight of medical evidence. Dr. Patel's reputation carried more authority than their denials. A hospital administrator joined the meeting, his voice clipped and official. Due to the serious nature of these findings, we are required to notify authorities. This is not optional. Linda paled, her hand flying to her mouth, while Richard's jaw clenched with suppressed fury. Ethan had not visited once since the night of the party, his absence a silent confession. I felt both fear and exhilaration as the administrator left to file the report. For the first time, the tide was shifting. No longer could my family hide behind dismissive words. The proof was ink on paper, images on screens, testimony from professionals. Later that night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I replayed the moment of my fall over and over. Ethan's smirk, his whispered dare, the slickness beneath my feet. It was no accident. He had planned it. He had wanted me silenced, humiliated, broken. My parents had chosen to protect him rather than save me. The betrayal burned, but it also hardened into resolve. If they thought I would remain voiceless, they were wrong. I whispered to myself in the quiet dark, I will not let this be buried. The next morning, detectives arrived, notebooks in hand. They asked precise questions, listened carefully, never once accusing me of exaggeration. I told them about Ethan's words, the oily surface, my parents' reaction, every detail that had haunted me. They nodded gravely and promised to investigate the deck itself. When they left, I felt a rush of something I had not felt in years, vindication. Truth had finally begun to breathe outside the suffocating walls of my family's lies. The evidence was no longer mine alone to carry. It was in the hands of people who believed me, and that was the first real step toward justice. The investigation moved faster than I imagined. Detectives collected samples from the deck and confirmed the substance was industrial lubricant smeared deliberately across the wood. The report stated it could not have occurred naturally, and it matched the residue Dr. Lopez had felt on her fingers that night. When confronted, Ethan tried to laugh it off, calling it a prank gone wrong, but the word prank sounded hollow next to the reality of an MRI showing my crushed spine. The police documented every contradiction in his story, every detail that proved intent. Soon the case escalated to charges of reckless endangerment and aggravated assault. My parents reacted as though the world was conspiring against them. Richard stormed into my hospital room shouting that I was destroying the family name. Linda sobbed beside him, begging me to recant, insisting I did not want to ruin my brother's future. But I no longer trembled under their words. The strength of evidence around me formed a shield. For years they had gaslighted me, convincing me my pain was imaginary. Now the entire justice system stood on my side. I told them flatly I will not lie for him. Ethan chose his actions and you chose to protect him. Their faces twisted with fury, and for the first time I saw fear behind their eyes, the fear of losing control over the story. The media caught wind of the case within weeks. Local news stations aired segments about a young woman paralyzed at her brother's engagement party, betrayed by her own family. The image of me in my hospital bed tubes running from my arms was broadcast into living rooms across the state. Reporters highlighted the role of Dr. Lopez, the doctor who stepped in when my parents tried to silence me. Public opinion shifted swiftly. Neighbors who once admired Richard and Linda now whispered about their cruelty. Social media filled with outrage. Strangers wrote letters of support to me, some from across the country, saying my story reminded them of their own battles against toxic families. The exposure cracked open the pristine facade my parents had cultivated for decades. Richard, who prided himself on respect in the community, found colleagues avoiding his calls. Linda, who obsessed over appearances, stopped attending church, unable to face the stairs. Ethan, who once strutted with arrogance, now appeared in mugshots, his smirk replaced with a scowl. Meanwhile, I remained in rehabilitation, fighting daily for fragments of mobility, my hands gripping parallel bars as therapists urged me forward. Each inch I managed to drag my foot was not just progress, but defiance. I carried the weight of betrayal on my back, but also the fire of vindication in my chest. During one grueling session, I looked up to see cameras filming outside the rehab gym. At first, it felt invasive, but then I realized the power of visibility. My suffering was undeniable, my story unerasable. Every frame captured was another crack in the lies my family spun. Court dates followed, each more public than the last. I testified from my wheelchair, my voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as I recounted the events. The prosecution played video clips from the party that guests had taken on their phones. In them, Ethan's mocking voice could be heard, my father's scolding tone, my mother's cold dismissal. The jury watched in silence as my pleas echoed through the speakers. The evidence of both the physical trap and the emotional abuse became impossible to ignore. For once, my words did not vanish into air. They resonated within walls of law and judgment. And as the trial unfolded, I saw clearly that this was no longer just my fight. It was a mirror for every hidden victim silenced by family loyalty. When the verdict came, the courtroom was packed, reporters scribbling, cameras waiting outside. Ethan was found guilty of assault and reckless endangerment. The gasp that filled the room was less shock than relief. My parents sat stone-faced, their empire of denial collapsed in public view. I felt tears burn my eyes, not just from justice, but from release. The chains of silence finally shattered. The exposure had done what years of pleading never could. It had forced the world to see, and in that visibility, I reclaimed my truth. The trial dragged on for weeks, each day peeling back another layer of the carefully crafted facade my parents had wrapped around Ethan. Prosecutors presented the MRI scans in vivid detail, explaining how the fracture aligned with deliberate sabotage rather than accident. Expert witnesses described the lubricant as intentionally applied. Dr. Lopez testified with unwavering clarity, recounting how she found me on the deck and how my parents tried to dismiss my paralysis as drama. Her words cut through every lie like a blade. Then came my turn on the stand. I rolled to the witness box in my wheelchair, my palms damp, my chest tight, but the moment I raised my hand and swore to tell the truth, I felt something shift inside me. Years of silenced cries, years of being labeled dramatic, all funneled into my voice. I told the jury about Ethan's lifelong torment, about Richard's controlling dominance, about Linda's manipulative whispers. I described the smirk on Ethan's face the moment I fell and the cold way my parents urged everyone to look away. My voice shook at first, but strengthened with each word until the courtroom fell utterly silent, every ear, straining to catch each syllable. The defense tried to paint me as bitter, exaggerating out to ruin her brother's future, but the evidence was against them. The MRI images glared from the screen. The residue samples spoke louder than their denials. The video clips of guests captured my desperate cries and my parents' cruel dismissal. By the time closing arguments ended, the jury's faces told the outcome before the verdict was read. When the foreman stood and announced guilty on all major counts, a shudder ran through me. Ethan slumped in his chair, his arrogance shattered. Richard's jaw worked furiously as if chewing on his own pride. Linda covered her face with trembling hands. The sentence came swiftly, years in state prison for Ethan community service and fines for my parents, who were charged with obstruction and neglect of a vulnerable adult. The gavel struck, and in that echo, decades of oppression cracked. But justice did not end at the verdict. The public fallout was immense. News outlets plastered our family name across headlines. Opinion columns dissected the case as a chilling portrait of toxic family loyalty. Talk shows debated how denial enables abuse. Letters poured into the courthouse, some from strangers thanking me for speaking when they never could. Social workers began citing my case in seminars about family violence. My parents, who once walked through town with heads held high, now scurried in shadows. Their business partners severed ties. Friends avoided their calls. The Carter name became synonymous with cruelty. Ethan's fiancée publicly called off the engagement in a statement that went viral. She wrote, "I will not marry into a family that destroys its own." Their world collapsed not by my words alone, but by the undeniable glare of truth. For me, the journey did not stop with the trial. Rehabilitation remained grueling. My legs were slow to respond, each twitch a battle. Some days progress felt impossible, but I clung to the knowledge that I had already survived worse. When despair crept in, I remembered the courtroom, the moment the jury believed me, the moment Ethan was led away in handcuffs. That image fueled me more than any therapy manual. Slowly, strength returned. I learned to maneuver my wheelchair with confidence, to transfer from bed to chair, to adapt to a body forever changed, yet still mine. And as months passed, I began speaking publicly. Organizations invited me to share my story. Standing before rooms of strangers, sometimes still seated in my chair, I told them about the trap, the fall, the MRI, the lies, the truth that finally emerged. I watched tears glisten in their eyes as they recognized pieces of their own lives. Survivors approached me afterwards, whispering thank you. Some said they finally felt brave enough to confront their abusers. My pain had become more than mine. It was a torch for others stumbling in the dark. The consequences for my family were devastating, but for me, they were liberating. The trial severed the leash of control they had wrapped around me since childhood. I no longer longed for their recognition. I no longer mistook their manipulation for love. They had been exposed in the harshest light possible, and I had survived to tell it. And though my spine bore the scars of Ethan's cruelty, my spirit stood straighter than ever before. The weeks following the trial were a blur of media interviews, therapy sessions, and navigating a world that suddenly seemed both smaller and larger at once. I returned home to an apartment that I had once considered mundane, but now felt like a sanctuary, a place where the echoes of my parents' judgment could not reach me. I arranged the furniture to accommodate my wheelchair, bought new plants to fill the spaces with life, and hung pictures of my travels, moments I had previously postponed, fearing their criticism. Each day, I woke with a sense of purpose, pushing past pain and fatigue, celebrating small victories like standing with the aid of a walker, or managing to cook a meal without assistance. Friends and distant relatives, once silent witnesses to my family's toxicity, now called checking in, offering support, and sometimes apologizing for not seeing the signs sooner. My social circle expanded as I connected with others who had survived abuse, forming bonds with people who understood the depth of my journey in a way no one else could. I volunteered at a local center for survivors of domestic violence, sharing my story and learning from theirs. Every recounting of Ethan's trap, every description of the betrayal by my parents strengthened my own resolve, transforming pain into purpose. Financial independence became another pillar of empowerment. Using savings I had secretly accumulated over the years, I enrolled in online courses, earning certifications that would allow me to transition into a career that was mine alone, far from the shadow of the Carter name. Each completed course, each skill mastered, was a silent victory over the manipulation that had long dictated my life. Public recognition also brought opportunities. Invitations to speak at conferences, write articles, and consult for organizations fighting family violence offered both income and a platform to influence change. Every speech I delivered was a declaration that surviving abuse did not mean remaining silent. I became more attuned to boundaries, learning to say no without guilt, to distance myself from toxic influences, and to protect my emotional and physical well-being. It was not easy. Relapses of fear and doubt surfaced unexpectedly, triggered by reminders of my past. But each time I stumbled, I reminded myself of the courtroom, the MRI images, and the justice that had been served. I began journaling daily, capturing emotions, progress, and reflections. These pages became a map of resilience, a reminder that the path from victimhood to empowerment was neither straight nor smooth, yet achievable. Slowly, I started dating again, cautiously, letting someone into my life, testing the waters of trust and intimacy. The first smiles, gentle touches, and shared laughter felt revolutionary, a reclamation of joy that had been denied to me for years. I learned to relish independence, from simple tasks like grocery shopping to organizing small trips alone, each act reinforcing the truth that my life belonged solely to me. Over time, I found a balance between sharing my story publicly and protecting my private life, carefully curating which battles were worth the exposure and which victories could remain personal. And in moments of quiet reflection, I realized that the trap, the fall, the MRI, and the courtroom had not only revealed my parents' cruelty, but had illuminated my own strength, resilience, and capacity to rebuild a life unshackled by fear or shame. Every day became a testament to survival, a celebration of empowerment, and a promise to continue forging a path of independence and authenticity.